अगर आप एक स्टूडेंट हैं या एक वर्किंग प्रोफेशनल,
we're good to start?
Yes, we can start.
Super. Thank you everyone for joining us on a Thursday evening. It's closer to the weekend, so I'm assuming everybody's really happy. So best time to host an online event is when people are in happier spirits than they might be on a Monday. So glad everyone's here. Just jumping into it, I think the idea for this conversation is something that we've discussed multiple times as part of the Agami team, as members of Agami Shala, with Manish specifically, that, you know, justice, the idea of justice with perhaps needs to be rescued from its old definition so we can reimagine what new possibilities it can really offer. And Justice Prabha was just right before mentioning how Professor Shamnath had asked her to write about what the justice looks outside the courtroom even. And there is a book there that's coming that we're all excited about. Another conversation that really brought this on was one where T.M. Krishna in a session with Agami was talking about how justice really is a feeling. So if justice is a feeling, we have to find more ways of articulating it, because only then can we also create solutions to enable it. So that's really where we're coming at into this conversation in this room. Joining us are incredible people and also the Agami Shala members who have played around with this reimagination in their own ways. I hope one of them will be joining us in a few minutes to actually read out something they created at Shala that offers a reimagination for justice. Jumping into quick introductions, we have with us Justice Prabha Sridevan, formerly from the Madras High Court, and her long and illustrious history as a judge with landmark judgments is long, and I will not go there, but because it's widely known, but I think I want to introduce her as our storyteller in chief. Justice Prabha has a way of bringing folk wisdom and stories to every conversation, to every way of understanding what is the role of justice in the lives that we lead, what is the role of us as people when we say we want to enable a world that enables well-being for all, really. And in one of her books recently that's come out called Meeran Stories, where she's the translator for Tamil author Meeran, she beautifully lays out the landscape of South India, and particularly Muslim South India, and what underscores that is the human experience, which is also the experience of justice in so many ways. So welcome, Justice Prabha. Always
Hi.
glad to have you with us.
Lovely to see you all.
Next, we have with us Advocate Bharat Chugh. Bharat was introduced to us by Manish at one of the Shala sessions, where Manish actually read out one of his poems that inspired a judge of the High Court to, in the judgment on a case he was working on at the moment. And that really is the best example of art intersects with law and justice. And Bharat's poem was called Tea Seller and the Judge, Criminalization Under the Railway Act. And Bharat, I hope you will talk more about how that poem came to be and what inspired it. Bharat's also been a judge, so that experience has played into this. Among many other things, Bharat's viral posts on how to be a lawyer and learnings from his own life are something I'm sure that all of you have seen around. One of the things that he mentions in a Twitter thread that's pinned on his Twitter handle is that how lawyers need to be storytellers, because as humans, we are predisposed to respond favorably to any sentence that starts with once upon a time. And I think that's so true. So thank you for that, Bharat, and look forward to hearing more from you. Last but not the least, Manish. Manish, before anything else, I think is a poet. And that's what makes him an exceptional coach and facilitator in the work that he does as part of the Social Presencing Theatre and Presencing Institute. Many of us at Shala have actually experienced Manish's work in many ways and how it expands one's consciousness when you use contemplative arts to realize what is the meaning underneath and what are the roles that we can all play if we sort of sift through what is the obvious. And art has been Manish's big way to do that. Manish's latest book that's out, Midnight Journey of a Seed. In fact, I have it here with me also, Pathways to Resilience in the Face of a Pandemic, talks about the experience that we've all been through as in the pandemic and how we all braved it. and maybe experience injustice at a very close personal and maybe structural level also. And how do we negotiate now that we're sort of moving out of it? And what has that enabled us in really? How does art, which is his poetry in this book, enable action? Is something that Manish can speak to us more about later in the session. So welcome all of you. I have spoken a lot, and I think now I will go into listening mode. And the first thing with so many storytellers in the room is, how have you reimagined? Tell us of an instance where art helped you reimagine justice. And maybe we can just go one by one with everybody in the room. Justice Prabha, if you can kick off.
Yeah. So I'll start with Once Upon a Time, because this is really a long time ago, perhaps 1987. I have acted in a few plays, and then I stopped acting. This play was by the Cuban-American writer Maria Fornes, and the play is Conduct of Life. There are 5 characters in it. Orlando, who's a military man and very violent. His wife Leticia, the maid Olympia, and there is a young girl who is kidnapped by Orlando, and he keeps her there and abuses her. She's about 12 years old. And then there is a friend. The friend is, I think you pronounce it as Alejo, Alejo. He knows his friend is wrong, but he's passive. So there are various power structures here. First of all, the husband and wife, the rich and poor, the owner and the worker, kind of. And I was Olympia, the maid. And during the rehearsals, Leticia would be sitting in the chair and I will be standing. And after a while, it bothered me. I resented it, that I had to stand and she was there sitting. And then I realized that this was a rehearsal. And I was doing it perhaps 2 hours in a day for maybe 15 days. And the number of persons who work like that day after day after day in our houses, in factories, in so many establishments. And what do they feel? And justice is not being done to them. And I stopped using the word servant after that, but that's not enough. I don't think I have managed to do justice totally in this regard. But not having enough food to eat at home, to have to wash dishes where people have eaten and perhaps even wasted. I mean, that is everyday injustice. And it is happening all around us. And I don't think we are conscious of it. We are not particularly cruel or anything, but we are just immune to it. We've taken it for granted that this injustice is part of life. So there are many such injustices. This is one injustice I would like to share. If I have time, I'll share one more instance, but it depends on the time.
So I'll do follow-up questions later, but just here, Justice Prabha, was there this experience of you really sort of embodied the injustice because you were actually part of play and doing that? That consciousness, once it was there, how did you sort of see it enable you sort of redefine how you saw justice when you then later in life entered the courtroom? What was it about it that stayed with you?
Yeah, the imbalance and the uneven structures are all around us. And what is a court expected to do really? Of course, there are routine cases and there are cases and there are momentous cases. But I think basically the authority who delivers justice is expected to mediate between the ones who do not have power and the ones who have power. I think very often in practice it is forgotten for various reasons. Because the ones who don't have power, perhaps they are not able to bring in the evidence that the court requires. But I think that consciousness should be there, that we are bridging the gap, we are bringing them closer. That is what I am here for.
Thank you, Justice Prabha. Bharat, if I can come to you next.
I think this would be one of the first cases that I did as a 23-year-old young baby judge, in that sense. As a trial court judge, you'd sometimes have hundreds of matters on your board. Sometimes you'd have 150 cases, 25 bail applications to be decided, 20 cases in which you have to pass a sentence order. And each of those cases, and this is how these are the problems with the system, right? We have less number of judges and too many cases and so on. The difficulty with that sort of a burden or pendency on the system is that you become immune to human feelings or experiences or realities, and you fail to empathize, because how much can you empathize at the end of the day? Can you empathize in 200 cases? Can you place yourself in the shoes of 200 litigants appearing in your court every day? So this sort of a burden on a trial court judge, especially in a country like ours, desensitizes them in a lot of ways, and dehumanizes the case itself, when to the point where it just becomes a file to be disposed of, a matter to be adjourned, a case to be pushed into the future. So that's the kind of sad reality that we live in. And in the middle of all of this, one of the assignments that I was heading as a judge, apart from my normal court, which was a court dealing with check dishonor cases at that moment, I also had the additional charge of this court where I would decide cases under the Railways Act. So I'd go there and under the Railways Act, for instance, if you're stealing railway property, or you're begging on a railway station, or you're selling something at a railway station without a license from the railway authority, that's a punishable offense. That's a serious criminal offense under this colonial law. So a lot of cases would come to us every day where very, very young people would be prosecuted and made to come to the court for doing things like selling tea on a train, right, without a license. So these cases have been coming into courts for the longest time. And as a young judge, what do? You look at precedent and you see how they've been dealt with in the past by your predecessor or by other courts. You ask your court staff, the court masters, on just get me some previous orders. Let me see how this works. And once I did that, I saw, much to my dismay, that in most of these cases, these very, very young people, 18 years, 19 years, they were fined, thousands of rupees for having done something like this, which in my view, and this was my gut feeling when I looked at the case, how can this be an offense? The man's doing something with his time, which is constructive. He's not committing an offense. He's providing, a very important utility to somebody on a train for a fair price. And how can this be an offense? But of course, when you look at the bare act, when you look at the law, the dry letter of the law tells you that this is indeed an offense, because he does not have a license to do this. And then I asked the prosecutor, and the prosecutor is arguing this case like this is a threat to national security, or this young boy who's in tattered clothes right in front of me in the court is a threat to the nation, and him being out or him going unpunished would have consequences. And I asked him, what's the difficulty? Can he get a license? No, he can't get a license. You need to be a company with X turnover in order to be applying for this tender, getting it, and then getting to sell or have the honor of selling tea in a train, which only a big corporation can. This guy cannot. And since he doesn't have a license, since he doesn't qualify, it is an offense. And ultimately, this is not an offense that requires any dishonest intention or any other form of mens rea, as we call it in criminal law. It's a strict liability offense. The fact of the matter is that he's doing it, and he's doing it. He should be punished. No further questions asked. Judge, the law also doesn't give you that flexibility or creative liberty to get him out somewhere. But I wasn't obviously satisfied with the response. I adjourned some of these cases. And poetry or reading or writing has been a way of, personally negotiating with life and trying to make sense of it, sometimes wanting to be lost, sometimes wanting to be found. So I obviously took to writing about this incident. And if we have time, I'll possibly read it at some point, the lines, or maybe I'll do it right away. Um, because I was, you're tossing and turning. Ma'am's here. Ma'am's, decided some of the most difficult cases, and she appreciate the difficulty when you're in a conundrum on, what to do, what interpretation to go in for, the consequences, and so on and so forth. So when I was, grappling with this, I wrote a few lines, and they go like this. Of a criminal, this judge writes, after thinking endlessly for days and nights. A young boy was produced before me. His abject poverty was for all to see. In a rich India of poor people, being poor was his crime. The state naturally decided that he should serve his jail time. He was accused of selling tea without license in a train. He was a migrant from a drought-ridden village. One could see his sheer pain. His father had hung himself on a tree from the mounting debts on seeds he wanted to break free. With that torn shirt, as if modesty was just for the rich, law or justice, I couldn't at first pick which. Why do you seek justice? This is a court of law, you see. I couldn't say that to him and still be me. I chose to exonerate him, but didn't say anything. How could I ask him not to earn his bread when the state couldn't bring? Could I think of a more honorable way this boy could have earned a living, selling honesty with fair billing? If I went by the strict letter of law and did fine, I wouldn't be able to sleep with the already vexed conscience of mine. For legal authority was there, but moral authority I had none. My nation's law had somewhat failed and poverty had won. So I wrote this, and then just trying to find out a way. Of course, once you've decided which way the justice lies, and we can, discuss and debate on what is justice in a given case till the till the cows come home. But on that moment, I thought that, that there are two ways possible, and this seems to me to be a way that is aligned with the constitution, that is aligned with social justice and the ethos of who we are. And I then obviously had to find out a legal way of doing this, right? Because you can't just say law is this and then but my feeling or my emotional response to this is this. So this is how I'll decide. So obviously I went back to jurisprudence, and I started pulling out cases. There's a lot of jurisprudence on the question whether begging should be an offense or not, right? If you're begging in order to, you know just get that one meal to get you through the day, to save your life, that may not be an offense. And some of these begging laws have been held to be unconstitutional by various courts. So I tried borrowing that principle, applying it to this situation, and then say these young boys are entitled to the defense of quote unquote necessity under the law. And whatever you do in that extreme state of necessity, where you do not have the luxury of different options. And that is what it was for a man like that, or for people like that. They came to the railway station, never could get out of it, couldn't send money back home, got absorbed in the ecosystem of a railway station. And that's how they do it. So I said necessity, IPC general exceptions apply. They apply to special acts also. This is a definition of offense, obviously created that legal framework of reasoning and passed that. And this was my way of trying to reimagine justice in that sense, by using art and by trying to tell a story. And I'm very happy to say this, and I've had the opportunity of working with the aspiring judges and young judges at academies across the country. And so happy to know that this really made the problem come out alive. It made it visible to a lot of people. It wasn't earlier, unfortunately, because people either didn't pay attention. In any event, a railway court is seen as an assignment or a particular posting, which is, like possibly a punishment posting in a given situation, or something that is not glamorous to do, right? So, but again, it brought that into the spotlight. And happy to report a lot of people passed similar orders and helped make a meaningful difference, which was the whole point of being a judge for me while I was there. So I'll just stop that very, very meandering response to a very straight question.
No, it's a beautiful response and so powerful. Thank you for even reading out those lines, Bharat. I can see people, of course, have resonated with it like we did. And Shala. And I think that really was the power of what you'd written, that suddenly it opened up the nuances of what we call justice and law and justice. I couldn't pick which. So thank you so much for sharing that. And it's an incredible example of how then it sort of helped you reimagine the law itself and necessity in under which that boy could be let go. Thank you so much for sharing. Manish, if I could come to you next.
Thank you so much, Justice Prabha and Bharat. Bharat, we read this poem, and I have read it a couple of times and referred to it. And one of the key thing is that you said that poetry helps you negotiate with life. I think you are helping humanity with help of poetry to negotiate with the law. So that's the beauty. And in Justice Prabha's story also, how when you embody this injustice, when you experience just injustice from inside through theater, and in your experience, you helped us embody the injustice with help of your poetry, that creates an awareness and consciousness that is necessary to work at deeper levels. Otherwise, we can get lost into just words. So I'm going to also share the one story to my experience, which is more recent with today is 24th. I realized, I think it was around this date that the lockdown, the first severe lockdown was announced 2 years back, I guess 24th March. And so it's very alive in me, that story, because within a couple of weeks, we learned that 23 million migrant laborers are stranded on highways. And looking at that, when the images came in and when some of us personally met people on the highway, it was to experience the collective trauma of another human being was very, very painful. You can just shut your windows of your heart down, but if you let it open, then it's going to take you somewhere. And that's what happened. And I wrote some poems on it, which I've published in this book, Midnight Journey of a Seed. One of that is Long Road to Humanity, and where I invite readers to walk with the migrant laborer, walk with the woman, and walk with the child. And in that poem, it ends with that their pandemic is not COVID, but the fragmented society, failed governance, fake capitalist stream, and the heartlessness of people like us residing in the top slots of the pyramid, unaware of the collapsing bottom. And that's how I was feeling. So you can see there is angst and anger in that poem. Now, at that stage, fortunately, I could surrender to art. And fortunately, some of my artist friends said, let's create a contemplative theater performance. And there, just like Justice Prabha, we could embody the experience of a migrant laborer, of a policymaker, because we are angry with policymaker and business. So once we embodied their experience, by which I mean that we made the shapes with our body. How does a migrant feel? How does a policymaker feel? How is a middle class feeling? And once we did that and we started articulating words which came from our embodied experience, we were surprised, because this whole divide between the hate the oppressor and pity the oppressed, we started experiencing something beyond. And that is something that I'm going to read another poem, which is a shift, which I'll read that full poem, which is called The Field Between Blame and Shame. This is after we embodied through theater, through poetry, what happened. When I stood outside, I could only blame the oppressor, pity the oppressed, and shame everyone else in the game. When I stood outside, I could only blame the oppressor, pity the oppressed, and shame everyone else in the game. Toggling between anger and guilt, I had no space left to transcend our collectively stuck script. Then I stepped in, and they pierced open my heart, as though they were my long lost parts. Now I can feel each soul within, the overwhelming burden of the sovereign, the grounded strength of the grassroots, and the helpless longing of those in the middle. Just then, I saw the artist move freely across the slots, and gently unlock us all, walking barefoot beside the children on the same long road. So this poem is an expression of how, expression of what Rumi says, that out beyond our right doing and wrong doing, there is a field. I will meet you there. So art took us into that field. And then what changed? The impact was that we start, just what Justice Prabha said, we started renaming. We said, no, they are not migrant laborers. We feel their strength. They are nation builders. They could walk 1,000 feet. So new projects were born where we started partnering with migrant labor. And this, by we, I mean, this was a network of around 15 nonprofits and activist organizations. We started partnering with migrant level laborers, grassroots women, and even policymakers. We got some people, ex-planning commission people, business leaders came in, and we created this funding, and new projects were born. Now, because we're not, now what is justice then? Is justice just fixing this? I'm new, I'm not completely well-versed in the language, but no, everybody is in the field of justice. If you're alive, if you're engaging with society, you are in the field of justice. So from that perspective, we realized that it was about solving this deeper problem. And then something else happened, because all of us who were involved were mostly middle class. We started seeing our own inner trauma. We started experiencing a kind of that how we were feeling guilty of exploiting the urban poor. We started becoming aware that how the caste system is built into this whole equation. And so right in my kitchen, my wife and I partnered with our cook to start a new social enterprise, and seeing her as a business partner than seeing her as a servant, as you said, Justice Prabha. So all of this shift, not just many stories were born, and I think that was the result of I think art helping us see the inner strength, and also not just blaming the policymaker, but understanding that they are overwhelmed too and they long to help too. So how do we then heal the society? While it started with, I think we touched upon a deeper purpose of this crisis or experiencing injustice is to facilitate healing. And that's what art does, that in some way. Back to you, Artika.
Thank you, Manish. That was super powerful. And of course, I've read this poem with you. And what you said after, I think that's really where I want to take this conversation next. And Smita's giving me a time check. But I think one thing that I really want to hear from all of you on is this process of why art? What did art enable you to capture that maybe other ways and means weren't letting you do? And what is your own process of interpreting a question of justice through art? What does that look like when you play it out as writers, translators, poets in your own way? Anybody who would like to go?
Art, I think, is the only antidote for this toxin of hatred and violence and everything negative, because that alone can, as Manish said, heal. And the preamble talks of justice, liberty, equality, and fraternity. Now, in what Bharat and Manish said, you see a play of all that. So these concepts are not to be buried in the Constitution and for courts alone. It's for us, because the preamble starts with the word "we the people." So I think we have to remember and make it part of our transactions with everybody. I will not use the word others, because the others is not a good word. Very often that makes us think that they are different, so it is all right. So the othering also is a negative impact. So we have to be very careful with our language.
So true. Bharat?
Uh, I think on how art has helped or helps. Uh, I think to me, art's also about stating things differently, right? I mean, law's language is drab. It's serious. It's very doctrinaire. It's very, you have maxims, and in all of that, I mean, for instance, something as simple as talking about people in terms of a plaintiff or a defendant or an appellant. Why can't we talk about them like they're people, right? Human beings, and I think we look at them differently when we do. So art's been about just restating things. Like, for instance, a judgment that I'm writing, and that judgment being restated in the form of, number one, restated simply, restated in a manner which helps people understand it, helps them absorb it, because law's language is tough. A lot of problems that we've had in people not being able to understand law or justice is because how we write or how we picture things, right? And that's what makes it, so elitist in that sense. So the endeavor is to take a legal case or a legal situation and to write it simply, so that, number one, the consumers of justice or the users of justice, number one, understand it. Second is people who are not parties to that litigation in that sense also understand how law plays out, and then participate in the process, understand the process. That's how we make processes better in that sense. So I think number one is to just ensure that procedure, these legal formalistic things do not ultimately end up uh, dominating the process. Like, for instance, a procedural law like a civil procedure code, 120-year-old law, sometimes defeats justice on so many levels, right? It's like the tail starting to wag the dog, and not just wagging the dog but strangulating the dog unabashedly. So in order to ensure that procedure is procedure, and what are we here to do? We are here to dispense justice. We are here to help people. We are here to, as Justice Prabha said, correct power asymmetries, imbalances, to make sure everyone's heard and heard well, and and to write a judgment. That used to be the mantra back in the day, to write a judgment that speaks to the litigant in that case, that speaks to people at large, because ultimately the ignorance of law is no excuse, right? And sometimes the way judgments are structured, there's absolutely no way that a common woman can understand that. So that's important to me, and arts helped it because it's helped give me, in some ways, the emotional bandwidth or the vocabulary to change the rules and state things differently. And somebody's done it beautifully recently. I was reading a judgment where a UK judge writes a judgment in a child custody case in the form of a letter to the child for whom the judgment is being written. And he says, I may write about all sorts of theories and so on, but what does it mean to this kid whose life I'm deciding by way of this judgment? So he tells the kid in para 1 that I'm writing this judgment for you. And that is the reason I'm not writing it in the way judgments are written usually. I'm writing it as a letter to you. So let's have a conversation. This is what the case is about. Your mom and dad, they're not bad people. It's just that adults sometimes don't get along well, and they don't get along well, and now I have to decide, who do you be with? Do you be with dad? Do you be with mom? Or do you be with both? And what does it mean to you, or what does it mean for you, the dispute that they're having? And so beautiful, right? And the story that this judge told, and otherwise what would have been a very traumatic experience for a kid, he eased that pain, almost like a just as therapy, just as communication and talking to the kid directly. So I think art really helps, and for want of a better word, for me, it has helped me travel the journey from judging to justicing in that sense, and to be always mindful of why we exist, and why do we do this. So yeah.
Thanks, Bharat. Yeah, completely resonate. And I think when I heard you speaking, it's what art does is it makes things accessible. And that's really what, when we talk about justice, is this feeling of justice, if we can make it accessible for everybody. What does that look like? And maybe once that happens is when we start reimagining the ways in which justice is dispensed, or how we negotiate it in our lives. Manish?
Thanks for naming it. I think letter writing itself is a form of art. It's a beautiful form of art. And it's such a powerful, just acknowledging that. And the other is also art as in paintings. And I think I've also used these paintings in the book. Actually, Sumitra Ahake, a Varli painter from Melghat. So recently somebody was asking what was your experience, and she said, "Mujhe पीड़ा महसूस हो रही थी जब मैं ये बना रही थी." So she was reading the poems and drawing this, and she was feeling the pain. And when I looked at her her drawing, I started writing differently. So sometimes art creates this social resonance of felt pain. And unless we have, I think that my teacher Arvana says that felt sadness, collectively felt sadness, is the foundation of humanity. If we do not have the muscle to feel sadness, we do not have muscle to be human and build society. And I think that's what differentiates us. And that's what art does. Art breaks open the heart. And just like this little story you told, Bharat, it breaks open the heart, and then we feel into the deeper longing. And my experience as a facilitator coach, the deeper human experience, even in the conflict situations all over the world, deepen human longing is of acceptance, forgiveness, healing, being seen, being met, being forgiven. It's very simple. And when we connect, and if that is opened up, which art kind of is just cuts open, when that opens, then a lot of other things are resolved. A good sorry, tabiyat se maafi maang li, so it heals. And maybe I will invite Artika to, if you can bring that experience which we had with Shamnath and with Anup, about how the maybe you know, Artika, which one I'm talking about, if you can share.
I think this is an exercise that we've done together at Agami Shala, where we were sort of embodying the roles of different stakeholders in a case that involved child abuse, and we were all playing different roles in it, and embodying it was really hard for all the people in the room. But when we started doing it, what we thought would be fraught relationships or tensions that seem obvious to us is what was revealed in that theatrical exercise almost was that there were many roles that we had not paid attention to, and some of them were the roles of the family of the survivor, this family also of the perpetrator, who are as much being affected by the crime, as we call it, or the injustice in this situation. And that really was something that was super insightful for us in terms of reimagining that when we talk of justice in this situation, for whom and what does it look like for not just one person, but everybody around them. And society as a whole is a part of creating that situation in so many ways. So there's multiple levels of healing that need to happen, multiple levels of ways in which we need to understand this situation. And the letter of the law, it's not black and white. There is nuance to it. And how do we bring that out in many ways? Manish, did I do justice to that?
Absolutely. I think the point that you're saying is that art also gives voice to the voiceless, powerless. And that is so important. Like nobody saw in that case when one who embodied made it visible to us the pain of the family of the perpetrator. I mean, and what about that? Where are they? What are they experiencing? So all of that was is, and maybe Justice Prabha, if you have time, Artika, she had another story to share. I remember that.
Yeah, of course, Justice Prabha, please go ahead. You're on mute.
This was when I was a judge, and this town Namakkal in Tamil Nadu, at that time, I don't know if the statistic still holds, had the highest number of HIV widows. Because Namakkal is a big lorry center. So the men from Namakkal go all the way to Punjab and come back, and they pass on their whatever to the wives, and when they die, the HIV widows remain. And the problem was the parents of the man, they would not give the children to the women because the mother had HIV. But actually it was their son who was the reason why this girl. So there were all kinds of questions, gas connection, and so many things. At that time, AP Shah was the Chief Justice. We went there were about 500 or 600 HIV widows. And they came up and we gave them, I don't remember, I think gas connection certificate, something like that. And when we touched them, they cried. They said nobody had touched them since they found that they were infected. And you realize then that though the other 4 senses are perceptible and touch is not perceptible, it is the one sense that establishes contact, literally. I mean, even etymologically, tact is touch. And you can look, you cannot look, you can hear, whatever. But when you touch, you are actually saying, we are one. And that we deny to people. And it told me how important touch is. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think just like you just embodied that, by your narrating this story, so artfully narrating that story brings us closer to that, which there is a othering in my own mind. There is a othering to HIV, and you just, at least in the story, I walked with you and touched. And I just want to maybe Smita can help us post some of the links, because reading your book, Meeran Stories, you have brought Meeran stories. I felt I'm listening to Meeran while reading the stories. I think I will never engage with that part of the community in the way I did. It brought me closer. I could understand their struggles. So thanks so much for sharing this story. And we also posted, I think Smita posted the link to your poem, Bharat. I think when you recited today, there were few extra lines which were not there in the, maybe they edited it out, but it really touched me. Yeah. Thank you. Artika.
Just before we close, it's something that was created at Agami Shala, something that Manish guided us through. And the team that created a future narrative on reimagining the future of justice so that it becomes more humane and inclusive is something that I think is a very powerful poem that this group created. And Avanti is here with us. And Avanti, would love for you to read that poem before we close this session. And tell us a little bit about how it came to be.
Sure, thanks so much. I mean, these are really powerful and moving words, and just absolutely privileged to, thank you for this opportunity for bringing us into this forum. So as Artika said, at Agami Shala, we sort of had to, we were asked with this question that what is the highest future possibility you envision in your area of work in 2030? And the group, 9 of us that had chosen this idea was reimagining the justice system. So we sort of, spent some time, a few sessions going over this, and it was a collective effort between 9 of us. So Swapnil, Swagata, Janvi, Shavani, Shivani, Akshay, Avanti, Aditi, and I sort of, contributed to this. They're not here today, but definitely a part of this initiative. I think where we came from, we really began with a diverse set of viewpoints. People came looking at justice from the side of, children and minority community rights. Some of us came from the angle of digital rights. some others from, human rights, police personnel, and from civic action. So it was a very diverse approach. And what we really wanted to do is, as you're saying, right, like bring the voices of those in the margins into the center. How can they be the focal point and we be their conduit or part of them bringing their voices to the center? And as you're all saying, right, like what we struggled with most, and I think what was most challenging, was removing this voice and sense of othering. How are we part of this process? How do we change our tone and words to incorporate that? How do you be diverse and cohesive at the same time? And we wanted it to be an emotive call to action, as all of you have also provided us with this in this session. So, a few things we kept in mind, looked at, what is the possibility and not just plugging gaps? What is the community and not just the individual? And also, what is the journey and the quality, not just the end goal? And that's what sort of guided us to create this spoken word poem. And what we also wanted to do is remove our names and sort of ideate and become a part of this. So how would we position ourselves? What role would we play? So we renamed ourselves to be the instigator, the catalyst, a watcher, a wandering bard, the future, and a supporter. So I'll just take this opportunity to read out the poem to everyone. It was making justice more humane and inclusive. They brought promises of hope. They came with inspiration. We stayed where we were. This is our fate. Do I cease to be a child because I have done the unspeakable? Do I have to bear the cross of justice and send my father to the gallows? Do I not have the right to love because I am not an adult? I am a protector, but who protects me? I am responsible, but do I act responsibly? As I support others, who supports me? As I build networks, where is mine? I am unheard by you. You are unheard by me. Does my reality threaten yours? Am I so much more than the labels you have slapped on me? I cannot be reduced to the worst thing I have done or experienced. I am who I am because of those unlike me. I am defined by the contours of differences between you and me. But I am in everyone, and everyone is in me. So what is the point of the othering? Is there anyone who has never hurt or harmed? How can I be humane when there is no humanity for me? Who has the final say to govern all our lives? I am in everyone, and everyone is in me. Let's listen and bear witness. Put our ears on the ground and soak the wisdom around us. Invert the knowledge flow. Investigate the I. Build evidence around what works and doesn't. Hold space for difficult conversations. Be empathetic and inclusive. Be willing to unlearn. Show up no matter how hard it gets. Speak up, especially when silence is the norm. The justice system must understand those it is meant for. It is trying to bring the margins to the center, to share the mic, to harness the wisdom that already exists, to create a space to unlearn from within and without, to be conscious of our own power and privilege, to break down the barriers and challenge prejudices, to build unlikely communities, discover unlikely leaders, to bring different injustices and realities to the fore, to question the power that doesn't empower, to turn the structures inside out. It is time to reimagine justice beyond the binaries of right and wrong. In tomorrow's world, structures will not freeze like ice, but respond and flow like water. Identities will be represented, not targeted. Power will be exercised with and not over. Justice will grow beyond fairness. In tomorrow's world, justice will blend with healing. Thank you.
Lovely, Avanti. Thank you so much. Justice will blend with healing. And I think we've gone past time, but there are questions coming from YouTube that I would really like to bring to the room, many of them, but I think one critical one that I think I'll just put forward and maybe one of you can choose to answer. The question is it important to keep the person facing injustice central to the art? Does art out of pity or guilt, which is natural, sometimes put the artists at the center and not the victims of injustice? Or should that not matter, since the art, irrespective of the source, brings out the problem, makes noise of the issue, and that is the sole purpose of art in the fight against injustice? Justice Prabha, I see you smiling.
It's a tough question and very difficult to answer. And though the word victim serves a purpose, it is also a wrong label, because it generally de-agentifies the person. And so I'd like to look at art as something which tries to see everything. And not, I mean, it's not just the artist or the one who has suffered violence or injustice, but the whole scene, as you said, there is the perpetuator's family to think of. For instance, let's take a motor accident. Very often what happens, if it is a big transport corporation and the accident has happened because of the bus driver's negligence, let's say, and his services are terminated, one whole family gets destroyed. So I would like to think of art as it aspires to look at everything. I hope I have answered the questioners. If anybody else can add, please.
If I may come into that, I think whichever way, it illuminates the situation and makes it come out alive is important. And I'll just go back to one of my favorite books. This is The Stranger by Albert Camus, where those who are familiar with the plot. Now, the protagonist of the story is somebody who doesn't cry at his mom's funeral. And later in the book, and apologies for the spoilers, later in the book, he's prosecuted for having murdered somebody. And the evidence that is led against him in that trial, which is an independent transaction, a murder case, is the fact that this is a guy who's not humane, who's not compassionate. He didn't cry at his mother's funeral. He didn't even know which day she passed away. And so therefore, this is a man who's not moral enough, or who's not sensitive enough, and that may be a piece of evidence that may be used by the jury to understand whether he's capable of something like this or not. A totally independent transactions, and you're taking that isolated instance to sort of make an inference or a judgment about whether he could have or could not have done this offense. But coming back to the question, in this case, the story may be told from the perspective of the victim, or the somebody who is the deceased in that murder trial, and could be told from that perspective. But at the same time, this can be told from the perspective of the accused, in that case, the protagonist, who is the accused as far as this instance or this transaction is concerned. But in the larger scheme of things, when you're talking about how do criminal justice systems work, how a jury or a judge may be biased by introduction of an element into evidence which normally should not be a relevant fact or a fact in issue in a given trial. So even the story told from the perspective of a defendant in a criminal case, and not just the deceased or their family, also has the capacity to bring us closer to the problems with systems as they stand, and how poets and artists can sort of exert and a moral power on a given system. And as somebody said, as unacknowledged legislators of the world, help us test our existing legal systems and our constitutions on a higher standard, like on a natural law standard, or make us question that this system is unjust, this law is unjust. It may have the backing of the powers that be of the day, but there is a higher standard on which we have to test this legal system. So even from different perspectives, there are takeaways, and I think as long as there's a story and helps us learn more, it's all for the good.
Thank you, Bharat. And I think that brings us to a sort of close to this session. The thing with storytellers is you want to hear more, and maybe we can keep coming back to this conversation for more and more. There are more questions on YouTube, and I think I'll send it to each of you separately. So maybe you can take time to answer it on your social channels. Another question that I think should make part 2 of this conversation that somebody's asked is, can science help us reimagine justice? And I think that's a good one to get into. Many of the best painters have been exceptional scientists that we know of. And another thing that I wanted to mention was, when we were talking about this conversation with a larger community, somebody recommended Kim Wright, the author Kim Wright actually wrote to me saying that you should have Anirudh Rastogi from Ikigai Law also as part of this conversation, because what Anirudh is doing is reimagining contracts, and he's using science and creativity there. So I think that's part 2 of the conversation that we should definitely have. Thank you everyone for coming in today. Thank you for the Shala folks here, and just incredible. Art blends with healing, and that blends with justice, and we find new ways to reimagine justice and making solutions for it. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much. Thank you.